Welcome back to Afternoon Live. According to the CDC, in 2023, about 1 in 36 children in the United States were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Here to share more, including what signs to look for, we welcome back clinician, brain researcher, and the author of Autism, The Scientific Truth, Dr. Robert Melillo. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course, and one of the more staggering statistics as well is how much more often boys are diagnosed than girls. Do we know why that might be?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my lab, we do a lot of research. We've published about 7 or 8 papers last year on autism and some of the things leading to it. And we've been able to show that primarily there's a maturational delay where the brain is just developing, especially on the right side, slower than it should. We know that boys have a longer maturational time to begin with, that boys tend to be a little bit more right brain dominant, and also boys are more susceptible to environmental influences in the womb. So those are some of them. You know, testosterone, we also know there's things like testosterone or estrogen mimetics, which are different plastics and pesticides that affect testosterone levels. So those are probably some of the main facts.
Okay, what are some signs that we can look for in autism?
Well, you know, the classic ones you read about are things like tics or stims or repetitive behaviors, communication problems that can be nonverbal or verbal. About 40% are non-speaking. They don't really speak in any sort of functional way. And they often have types of OCD, maybe hyperactivity, and decreased social awareness or social interactions. But you know, also we see that most people on the autism spectrum are actually very, very gifted. You know, I think there's a misconception that they have a cognitive deficit, but in fact, my research has shown that basically everyone, even the kids that don't speak with autism, they have these genius level left brain skills that are just absolutely incredible. And many of them may have what's called hyperlexia. They may speak before the age of 2 or even 1. They have a phenomenal memory for certain types of things like locations. So those are some of the things that we see in autism.
Yeah, their brains might just be working differently than some of us would expect them to. So those were some of the signs that you mentioned of what we can see outwardly. What actually is happening in the brain of a child with autism?
Well, according to our research, what we see is that there's actually this developmental delay on the right hemisphere, which is really our social and emotional brain. That's the one that has mainly nonverbal communication. And that also should develop first in the first 2 to 3 years and really kind of control the left as it comes online. We know that we see also an overactivity of the left hemisphere, especially in certain networks that govern like motor activity. So we see tics or stimming behavior or OCD type of activity with increased function of the left frontal lobe with decreases in the right. What we don't see is we don't really see any damage. We don't see any injury or metabolic disorders. We don't see any genetic mutations in the majority of kids, vast majority, 90% of more kids that are diagnosed with autism. So it really is this maturational developmental delay and imbalance between certain networks, particularly the social networks on the right side and the left side of the brain.
So what can we do as either parents, caregivers, or just adults in society to help set these kids up for success in their own adult life eventually?
What we've been doing is studying over the past several years, looking at something known as retained primitive reflexes. These are reflexes we're all born with that allow us to move and interact with the world and build our brain in the first year. And then once we stand up and walk and talk, they should go away and allow for more complex movement and a more complex brain, and builds the brain and then comes down and regulates everything. What we see is that if we have any altered developmental milestones like crawling or scooting or any of those things, or delays in walking, that is a signal that those reflexes aren't going away. And we have found that we can train parents and other doctors and therapists, just to be able to do some stimulation of those reflexes to help them go away. And that actually changes the brain and allows the brain to then mature in a more normal way.
That's amazing. Are you surprised or encouraged by how much we've learned, how far we've come in autism research? I think just the last 30 years or so, it seems like so much has changed, even the way that we can talk about it.
Yes, I think, it's great that we have an increased understanding. I don't think there's enough people out there that really understand what's happening in the brain. Most parents I see that come from all over the world to our clinic in New York, I ask them, has anybody explained to you what's happening in your child's brain? And the answer is almost always no. They have no clue. And so I don't think we're doing that. And also the big problem, I think, is that it isn't really translating into effective treatment or really trying to understand how to help individuals. And that's really my goal. My goal is to really come up with something that can help, not change them because they're amazing and they're geniuses, but to really allow them to, and especially speak. I work with a lot of children that really don't speak at all, and that's very, very difficult. And we've been very successful at being able to get them to speak, and some of them at a completely typical level.
That's wonderful. I love your approach. Hey, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you as well.
The book again is Autism by Dr. Robert Melillo, and we'll have more information on our website at katu.com. And we'll be right back with more Afternoon Live right after this.